and welcome to NTV Wild Talk with me, Smriti Vidyarthi. Remember, you can join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag NTV Wild or like our NTV Wild Facebook page. Today, we're coming to you from the United Nations headquarters here in Gigiri, Nairobi, and this is why we're here. Founded in 1945, the United Nations is an international organization currently made up of 193 member states. The UN assists governments in agenda setting and decision-making on development issues at the global level. Headquartered at the UN in Nairobi is the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP. It is the global environmental authority that sets the global environmental agenda. A healthy population is connected to a healthy environment. Several environmental challenges are experienced in countries around the world, but Kenya's challenges include pollution, deforestation, global warming and climate change, land use and waste management, all of which have an impact on our everyday lives and on our quality of life. At UNEP, environmental conditions are assessed and decisions are made about how to better manage and care for the environment by informing and enabling nations. This week, from May 23rd to May 27th, the second session of the United Nations Environment Assembly, UNEA 2, is taking place at UNEP with the theme Delivering on the Environmental Dimension of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The Assembly represents the world's highest-level decision-making body on the environment and will culminate in resolutions and a global call to action to address the critical environmental challenges facing the world today. Major issues such as the illegal trade in wildlife, air quality, renewable energy and the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, will be addressed. So this really is an important place. Key decisions that are made at the United Nations end up trickling down to both you and me. But today the show is going to focus on UNEP, that is the United Nations Environment Programme that is of course located right here. I'm about to check it out and also meet the Executive Director. Come with me. Achim, hi, good to meet you. Good afternoon.
Very nice
and
to see you.
Thank you for your time. I've got to say, these grounds here at the UN are pretty fabulous. I mean, I just want to show my viewers, look at something like this. This says UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Programme. It's super. This programme is located here, is headquartered here at the United Nations. Why Kenya?
Well, the story goes back to 1972 when the United Nations had a conference on the environment and decided to set up a United Nations Environment Programme. And Kenya, in its wisdom at the time, said, well, why not bring the first UN agency ever to be headquartered in a developing country here to Kenya? And it won the race. And so in 1972, the seeds were sown that led to UNEP establishing its world headquarters here and subsequently UN Habitat and the United Nations office at Nairobi and about 50 other agencies over the years moving to have their headquarters here or their regional programs managed from here.
Wow, so there really is a rich and deep, long history to UNEP. It is a very important part of the United Nations, part of the world and definitely part of Kenya as well. But tell me, Achim, why should the ordinary Kenyan be aware about UNEP and what it does here? Why should they care?
Well, first of all, because every Kenyan knows that the environment is not something that is unimportant to what happens to Kenyans, whether it is at the level of a farmer or a household or for Kenya's economy. So having, first of all, a global United Nations Environment Programme matters because many environmental threats are also affecting Kenyans. But secondly, our presence here has also been part of Kenya's own journey in discovering the importance of the environment, beginning to look at new technologies such as renewable energy technology, working with leaders such as Wangari Maathai and the Greenbelt movement. And so we have become part of Kenya's own story in protecting the environment, understanding the threats in terms of pollution and waste. And ultimately, Kenya is also benefiting because by having our world headquarters here, we bring people, we bring conferences, we bring tourists, we bring business into the economy. So all of this, I think, is important to Kenya. But above all, it is because hopefully the decisions that are made with UNEP and the United Nations will ultimately also benefit Kenya.
Right, well, speaking about the decisions, take us through a little bit about what really happens here. I mean, this building behind us, which I'd love to go in just a moment to
Sure.
check out, that's where a lot of the decisions are made. And those decisions ultimately make a difference and impact the Kenyan man or woman on the ground. So what really happens in here? What sort of decisions are made?
Well, first of all, the purpose of a United Nations organization is to look at the whole world. So our mandate is to keep the global environment under review. We take the latest science about what is happening to the air, to the oceans, to wildlife, to our natural resources, and try and bring them to the attention of policymakers, because if we don't understand the threats, then we can also not respond to them. Now, obviously, we have many of the world's leading experts working here, but they are embedded in a whole community of scientists, of ministries of environment, but also many other actors in civil society, in the business world. And what we do is basically bring to the attention of governments, here is a need to act. If there is a hole in the ozone layer, what can we do about it? That's what UNEP did over 35 years ago. And then a convention was agreed, and we have managed to phase down and out these so-called ozone-depleting substances. The science of climate change had its beginnings here in Nairobi, when UNEP assembled the world scientists to say, Houston, we have a problem. Something is going wrong and we don't know what it means. Today we have a convention, we have agreements such as the Paris Agreement last year. The world comes together to act as one. Why does it matter to Kenya? Well, global warming is going to affect Kenyans, and in fact already is. If the world does not stop global warming, Kenya will see more droughts, more floods, sea level rise. The consequences become unmanageable.
Really?
So this is why sometimes we need global action in order to also protect the local interests.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, I'd like to talk about the challenges in just a moment, but first I want to get in there. I want to see what happens behind the scenes. Yeah, let's have a look.
Sure, let me take you there.
Thanks. So this building, it looks pretty interesting. The architecture looks great, and I also noticed that there's so much greenery around as well. Tell us a little bit about the building.
Well, this has become the first ever United Nations climate neutral headquarters building. So UNEP's home is now also an example of walking the talk. The water you see here is rainwater harvested.
Oh, and some big, beautiful fish.
Absolutely, and swimming happily. On the roof there is a solar installation. It was at the time that we built it the largest rooftop installation of solar panels in Africa.
Really?
I'm very happy to say we have since been overtaken by Strathmore University and also by the Tika Mall.
Okay.
And that was part of our idea, that we wanted to show that here in the heart of Africa, on the equator, we can actually demonstrate that these 21st century technologies work also in Africa and are actually very appropriate for here.
Excellent. All right, let's go in.
Sure.
I've never seen a building like this before.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Beautiful, full of greenery and amazing plants, and I'm really impressed. Tell me more, tell us more.
Well, basically it's a very simple building. You know, we have no air conditioning, we have no heating, everything is through natural ventilation. So these courtyards also have a roof with a hole in it. In the summertime, the hot air is extracted from the offices. We don't need any mechanical climate control. On the rooftop you have the solar installation, so it produces all the electricity that we consume with 1,200 people, UN Habitat and UNEP here. The courtyards have been turned into 4 ecological zones of Kenya. So what you see here is this wonderful vegetation that not only is beautiful, makes for great quality, helps climate control and keeps nature in the building, because much of our urban construction nowadays is all about destroying nature.
Yeah.
And here we have made nature part of it.
And sorry, who constructed this?
Well, this is the beauty. After having many years ago had an international architect and having failed, we then tendered it with a local architectural firm and also a local construction firm. And together we formed a team, and they themselves got very excited. For instance, the design. Bigger windows means 40% less electricity. Therefore, we can provide ourselves with electricity through the solar panels. The water on the roof is harvested and reused in the gardens. The carpets are made from recycled carpets that are put into the building. And so our idea was not to build the perfect building, but to build a functional environmentally sound building in which people would be happy to work. And I think that is what we have achieved.
No doubt, this greenery gives everyone a good boost. Why wouldn't you want to come to work, right?
Exactly.
But here's my challenge, my question. Why don't we have more buildings like this across the country?
Well, like in so many things, a trade, a profession is trained. There is a way of doing business. It takes time to change the attitudes, the skills of the profession. Many architects were trained in another age, so they don't think about a building that tries to minimize electricity consumption. It is all about maximum comfort, modern feel.
Yeah.
And I think what we learned here, and to be very frank, many now in Nairobi are actually doing similar things. Strathmore University
Yes.
now has its own new business school with a solar installation and a wonderfully environmentally sound building. We see solar technology taking off all over Kenya. And I think it sometimes takes pioneers, and for us as the United Nations Environment Programme, it was a way to say, look, if we ask others to be environmentally more sound, then we must lead by example.
Of course.
But not by spending more money. This building did not cost a cent or a dollar or a shilling more than it would have cost if it had been built in the traditional way.
Really?
Yeah, and more importantly, we will, after having paid off the installation on the roof in about 9 to 10 years, we will actually be earning money because we'll be producing excess electricity. So from becoming a net payer of electricity bills,
Yeah.
we're actually going to be earning money off the roof of this building.
Wow, that is so interesting, and I certainly hope that architects that are watching this and many other people really do learn something from it. But you've brought up many issues as you've been explaining this building. Air quality, you don't use air conditioners, for example, solar power and things like that. I want to talk now about the challenges that Kenya faces. We know there are issues of pollution, waste as well, marine waste. There are several challenges that Kenya is facing, but what are the pressing issues? What do we need to act on now?
Well, I think like every Kenyan would argue is, first of all, development. The population is growing. There are many people who are still poor. So what are the livelihoods of Kenyans going to be supported by? Is it industry? Is it commerce? Is it agriculture? And I think here is the first challenge. How do we understand that development is not only about railways, bridges, power lines, buildings and the cities, it's actually about the ecological infrastructure. Water doesn't come out of a tap. It comes from the water towers of Kenya. The food is not produced in some laboratory. It is grown on land where farmers produce it. How do we maintain the ecosystems and the ecological wealth of Kenya while developing new sectors? But even in the modern economy of Kenya today, tourism, many people don't correlate the fact that there are many tourists who come here because Kenya has invested in protecting its wildlife, its biodiversity, national parks and coastal zones. It's the second, third largest external revenues earning sector in the economy. But people often think, well, if we finance national parks, if we finance KWS and KFS and marine parks, it's kind of taking money away from development. It's a big misunderstanding. Restoring the forest cover of this nation is its best insurance against climate change.
And how much of a challenge has that been to UNEP? Because we know that many of our forests, specifically the Mau forest, has had big problems facing it.
I think every Kenyan today knows how important forests are and forest cover. But the economy of forests and of illegal logging and of land grabbing has hurt Kenya a lot, and it has lost much of its forest cover. Today there is a constitutional provision which makes Kenya almost unique in the world about restoring a 10% forest cover. UNEP cannot do this work for Kenya. What we can do is provide the analysis, the advice. We did the satellite imagery. We also did the economic assessment of what is the value of a Mau forest actually being left intact for the economy of Kenya, farmers, wildlife, water supplies to the cities. But then it is for Kenyans to actually make the choice that we want to protect our forests and we want to stop what is essentially a theft from the country when people log illegally.
Right, and how well or poorly is Kenya doing? How are the people doing in addressing these issues? Are we on the right track?
If I was a Kenyan, I would be impatient and I would be frustrated because I can see every day across the country decisions being made that are not environmentally sound. As the Executive Director of UNEP, I look at Kenya and I compare it to many other nations, and what I see is a country that is very conscious about its environmental wealth and also its vulnerability. Whether it is a Wangari Maathai in the Greenbelt movement that brought awareness of it, or the Ministry of Environment, or indeed the President looking at the issues of wildlife.
Right.
So Kenya has done many things. For instance, in the renewable energy sector, Kenya is today one of the leading nations in transition towards a clean energy system. It's amazing, and it's a story that many would not have believed possible a few years ago, and it hasn't made electricity more expensive. That was always the argument.
Yeah.
We cannot afford it, the poor will not have access. You have not only geothermal power now, you have the largest wind power farm being built here in Kenya. You have an amazing new scheme and market for solar lighting, for instance, with Mkopa. Kenya is building an economy around this notion of a green economy where modern development, jobs and industry becomes not something that always has to destroy the environment. That is the challenge of the 21st century, and in that sense Kenya is doing quite well. But every day decisions are made despite knowing what would be the right way to go, and that is politics, and that is how in a democracy people must in the end say this is the direction we want in the future.
Right, okay, well, there's still so much more to discuss, Achim. I'm pretty fascinated, and I certainly hope that you are too. But we're taking a short break on NTV Wild Talk. Do stay with us, there's plenty coming up, but not before we give you a chance to win a fabulous prize. Here is our Wild Guess question. What is the biggest environmental challenge that Kenya needs to address, according to Achim Steiner? What is the biggest environmental challenge that Kenya needs to address, according to Achim Steiner? Use the hashtag NTVWild on Twitter or like our NTV Wild Facebook page and post your answer on the timeline. Private messages won't be considered. The first person to answer correctly wins 2 full-board complimentary nights for 2 at the exclusive Finch Hatton's luxury camp in Savo West. Surrounded by fresh water springs and an abundance of wildlife, Finch Hatton's was voted the best tented camp in Africa by the World Tourism Awards 2016. The winner also gets 1 bottle of wine, courtesy of Wines of the World, and a gift hamper, courtesy of Wildlife Direct. Terms and conditions apply. Last week's lucky winner was Francis Mbate. Welcome back to NTV Wild Talk with me, Smriti Vidyarthi. We're coming to you from the United Nations Environment Programme headquarters here at the UN in Gigiri, Nairobi. Here now is a reminder of our Wild Guess question. What is the biggest environmental challenge that Kenya needs to address, according to Achim Steiner? What is the biggest environmental challenge that Kenya needs to address, according to Achim Steiner? Use the hashtag NTVWild on Twitter or like our NTV Wild Facebook page and post your answer on the timeline. Private messages won't be considered. The first person to answer correctly wins 2 full-board complimentary nights for 2 at the exclusive Finch Hatton's luxury camp in Savo West. Surrounded by fresh water springs and an abundance of wildlife, Finch Hatton's was voted the best tented camp in Africa by the World Tourism Awards 2016. The winner also gets 1 bottle of wine, courtesy of Wines of the World, and a gift hamper, courtesy of Wildlife Direct. Terms and conditions apply. Last week's lucky winner was Francis Mbate. So here at the UN, I still am on a tour of the amazing grounds at UNEP in particular. With me is still the Executive Director, Achim Steiner. As we're walking around, we have come across something that's caught my eye. I'm just curious, can we detour and have a look?
Sure.
So what is this? It says Microsoft on it. What's it all about?
Well, basically inside most modern office buildings, the server rooms where computers are stored are actually some of the most expensive parts of the building in the sense of running costs, because air conditioning, climate control for the servers is extremely important. What we did here is, together with Microsoft, is put a container on the outside that has our servers in them and is cooled by essentially cold water and wind. And that has reduced our electricity bill by 80 to 90%, perfectly insulated in terms of no dust getting in. And
Wow.
another way of cutting the cost and the electricity consumption and making a building cheaper to run and less polluting in terms of carbon dioxide.
So where does the water come from?
It's a closed circuit. The water basically runs down over the side and a propeller drives the wind through it, and that cools it down to the temperature that is needed to keep the server room on a constant temperature.
Yeah, because I can imagine so many offices have fully air-conditioned rooms just to protect their servers, and this is such a great example.
This is the building of the 21st century.
Yeah, and it's working, right? It certainly
Since 4 years.
Working. Gosh, all right. Well, still more questions about challenges and sustainable development goals. So let's continue our tour of this incredible campus. So there really is plenty of greenery here on the UN complex and around it as well. Behind us now is a beautiful background of the Karura forest, and we can also hear the river flowing fiercely as well. Such a peaceful environment to be in. So I'm enjoying this this interview, Achim. Let's talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, or otherwise they're known as SDGs. For those who don't know anything about them, what are they?
At its simplest, it's saying that we can have economic progress, but we must also think about the social dimension, equity, health, well-being of people, and it must also take account of the environment. The Sustainable Development Agenda is about how the three dimensions interact. For the last 200 years, development has essentially said economics is everything. We don't have to worry about inequality. We can clean up and repair the environment. Now we live in a world where we are running out of resources, where pollution in the atmosphere is changing our climate. We may not have enough water anymore in many countries around the world, natural disasters. So the Sustainable Development Agenda is an effort to bring all nations together, because what happens in Europe will affect Africa. What happens in Africa may affect China. And that is what the United Nations has tried to forge with the Sustainable Development Goals. 17 areas in which all countries have agreed to work together towards greater sustainability.
And that is to reduce poverty and, of course, protect the planet as well. How is Kenya doing on that?
Well, the SDGs were only adopted in September last year, so this is now an agenda that will take us to the year 2030. But in many respects, Kenya has a good starting point. It has invested in education, in maternal health. It has also invested in infrastructure. Access to energy is now progressing, because that is part of development also. And the renewable energy story of Kenya has actually brought prices down and given more people access to electricity. Yeah. So I think Kenya is on a good road, but perhaps the biggest warning light would be watch out for climate change, and secondly, think about how you develop the country, because every time you build a road, a building, more cities, power lines, you are going through nature. Ecological infrastructure is part of Kenya's future economy.
Right, and tell me now, what is perhaps the biggest impact that you or UNEP has had on Kenya? The biggest positive impact?
I think we have been part of Kenyans, perhaps earlier than many countries, appreciating the relationship between development and environment. Secondly, I think we have also been part of some of the innovations that have enabled Kenya to make progress. The green energy policy of Kenya, its investments in wildlife, national park systems, protecting biodiversity. And I think today part of the Vision 2030 has also been to bring the green economy with all its opportunities into the discussion. And hopefully that is a part of the conversation that Kenyans are going to take forward.
Now, air quality and pollution, that is a big issue. We may feel here in Kenya that we're breathing in clean air, but in fact, we're actually not. Am I right in saying that?
Absolutely, and unfortunately Kenya shares the fate of most major cities in the world. Their air quality has become a real issue. In fact, it is estimated that 7 million people every year die prematurely as a result of indoor and outdoor pollution. So
really?
Whether it is cooking in a small house in the rural areas, or whether it is the pollution from fuel, from vehicles, from industry in the cities, the air is killing us. Wow. And that is why we have just brought a new device also to the attention of the world that we're just testing in 7 locations around Nairobi now, that has brought the price of monitoring air quality down by a great deal. And hopefully in a few years' time after the tests here, schools, cities, villages all over the world will be able to measure their own air quality, and through, for example, cell phones, feed it into a global database.
Wow. So
that every citizen knows what is going on.
Gosh.
So I think in that sense, yes, it's a very practical illustration.
All right, now UNEA is happening this week. It is a big event, the United Nations Environment Assembly. What is happening? Tell us more.
Well, first of all, the idea is that in our world we needed a World Parliament for the Environment, and UNEP in 2012 was asked by the heads of state and government to be strengthened and to be upgraded. So what we now have is the only other assembly in the United Nations next to the General Assembly that has all member states of the UN actually as members. So we have truly a World Parliament for the Environment here. It is meeting this week the second time, and it has a record number of delegates, over 170 nations that are represented, private sector leaders, civil society leaders, and last week also a science policy forum that brought 300 of the world's leading scientists here to Nairobi to help shape the policy agenda. What we know about what's happening to the world needs to be acted on, and that is UNEP's business.
Wow, so UNEA really is a very important event. But what can Kenya expect from it? How are decisions and discussions that are going to happen at UNEA going to filter down to our viewer who's watching? Why should they care about it?
Well, sometimes it may take a few years, and the first impact might be perhaps more traffic jams in Nairobi, and I already apologize for this. But let me also say, UNEA alone is bringing into Nairobi and Kenya's economy over 10,000 bed nights in the 10 days in which we bring the world together here in the environment capital of the world. But how does it translate into practical action? Well, UNEP funds programs that are mandated by governments also in Kenya. Trying to, for example, agree new conventions and treaties will also help protect the health of Kenyan citizens. Tackling the illegal trade in wildlife, for instance, something that Kenya has made a priority, depends on international action. It is here at UNEA that agreements are reached, that we also work with the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, limiting the use of chemicals that harm humans, phasing out mercury. These are things that affect our health, that impact on the environment, and only through UNEA do they become a global agenda and then hopefully also actions that are implemented.
Wow. All right, let's talk about you now, because you have been the Executive Director here at UNEP for the last 10 years. That's a really great amount of time, but your tenure is almost up. What have been some of the biggest challenges that you've faced? What have you perhaps failed to achieve that you set out to achieve, if anything?
Well, first of all, the challenge, but also the mission of a United Nations organization is to accept that countries have differences, and therefore our role is not to pretend that everybody agrees, but that we work with science, with diplomacy, and also with legitimacy in bringing nations together to act, even if their interests may seem different at the departure point. To show the benefits also particularly to the developing world, because often environment was viewed as something that is really an agenda for the rich countries, and I hope UNEP is today in part appreciated so much in the global south because we speak to the real issues of development, poverty, and the future of economies. Some of my challenges have been the bureaucracy. You know, we work in an international civil service, it is governed by member states. To try and run an organization as efficiently as possible is not always easy, but I'm very proud that in the 10 years that we have worked together as a team here, we have doubled the amount of finance that UNEP has available to give to countries, work with them, and we have not increased our staff numbers. That is also something that I'm proud of. And then many things that did not get done enough of. The oceans, the marine realm. Things are in trouble in the world's oceans, but governments are not paying enough attention to it. We have to do more. Environmental crime has become, you know, a multi-billion-dollar business.
Charcoal
not just
burning
exactly.
And,
People often think of, you know, elephants and rhinos. It's trees, it's plants, it's basically nature being stolen from communities, from national economies, and feeding essentially international criminal networks. Priorities for the future.
Yeah, most definitely. And what about your biggest successes? What do you think that you have really achieved in the last 10 years? I'm sure there's lots, but if you were to pinpoint.
Well, one thing is that when you are about to leave your job, I think one nice indicator is that people don't necessarily want you to leave. So that is, you know, the compliment that I was hoping for. I think we have also been able, for example, for Kenya to address this notion that people are trying to take UNEP out of Kenya. Nobody talks about this anymore today. UNEP's headquarters has been, is, and will be in Kenya. And I think that is also a small achievement. But in addition to that, during my period as Director General of UNON, you know, to be able to construct this building and show that here in the heart of Africa we can make 21st century technology work for the local economy. And then the green economy in general. I think UNEP is today a highly regarded and respected authority on not just environment in its own right, but how it affects people, economies, livelihoods and health. That is the agenda for environment of the future. We are not some small sector, an afterthought. We're actually the foundation of development for the future.
So, talking about the future, where are you headed next?
Well, I will be moving to the UK. I have been offered a wonderful position as director of the Oxford Martin School at the University of Oxford, and it's an interdisciplinary research school that works on, as they call it, the great challenges of the 21st century. So hopefully also with some connections back to Kenya and Africa.
Right. And we have a great man coming from Norway to take over the position of the Executive Director here at UNEP. Tell us more about who he is, and also what would your advice be to him? What are the pressing issues that really, in your view, ought to be addressed immediately?
Well, first of all, let me tell you, his name is Erik Solheim. He's a very experienced Norwegian who was both Minister of International Development and Environment, and in fact knows UNEP from his time then as a national minister. He's currently with the OECD in Paris, chairing the Development Assistance Committee of the international community, and he will be arriving here in Kenya, finding a fantastic team. And I think what he probably would not want is advice from his predecessor on what to do. So
right,
let me just say, a great person to lead UNEP through the next generation of its work, and above all an institution that is truly in a good place. To be an environmental policy leader and institution in the year 2016 is actually something that you can be looking forward to doing, because things have changed and now is our time to undo 150 years of development narrative that always said the environment doesn't matter.
Yeah, well, you know, earlier you talked about the importance of Kenyans doing things for themselves. This is my first time coming to the UN, or rather I've been here once before, but it was for a reason. But how can the ordinary Kenyan get involved with, you know, protecting the environment? What is it they can do, and how can they come and visit this incredible complex?
Well, first of all, let me tell you, however much we all regret that we live behind fences and with security, and this is unfortunately the reality that we face today. It's one of my great regrets, because ideally this campus, which once was a coffee farm, today is this wonderful campus, should be accessible, and it still is. Kenyans are welcome to visit the United Nations office at Nairobi, to tour our building, to see UNEP's work here in practice. They just need to register, and then there are actually guided tours here. And in terms of our ability to make that work accessible to Kenyans, you know, UNEP in itself is not the point. We do work for the whole world from here, and this is sometimes our challenge. We cannot be in all the villages on the coastal zones of Kenya. But what our work can do is help non-governmental organizations, the government, the private sector. I have a vision for Kenya to becoming a Africa-wide capital for green finance. Right. The finance sector is here, UNEP is here, the Central Bank of Kenya. These are the opportunities where we can meet. But I think at the end of the day, every Kenyan actually has to take responsibility for what happens in Kenya's environment. That is the parliament, the elections, the non-governmental organizations. UNEP cannot do that for Kenya, but we can be a partner, we can be an advisor, and sometimes also a source of technical or financial help.
All right, well, we wish you all the best. Thank you so much for your time, and good luck going forward, and well done on the job done already.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure to have you with us. That's Achim Steiner, the Executive Director of UNEP, that is the United Nations Environment Programme, discussing all things from UNEA to the importance of conserving our environment as well. There is plenty that you can do to contribute. For now, though, we shift focus, and it's time for our wild pick. All you did was send in your photos that demonstrate that you are keen on nature, the environment and wildlife. Here are some of your photos. Meshach Kipkorir sent in this photo taken at Mount Longonot. He says he had gone hiking to appreciate nature and Kenya's beauty. Kennedy Ngeno sent a photo from the ivory burning site at the Nairobi National Park. He says he was volunteering in preparation for the burning of the ivory and rhino horn, and he says he volunteers to secure the lives of elephants and rhinos. Then there's Dr. Rotich Enoch, who sent a photo from Olkarai camp in the Masai Mara. He was holding a baby mongoose and a bushbuck, and he had gone there to offer free medical and dental service to the Masai people, and also to go on a safari with the Global Village Ministries. There's also Cyprian Ogoti, who sent in a photo taken at the Suswa Girls High School in Narok County. In this picture, he's planting trees, and he says he's doing this for environmental conservation through tree planting. Joshua Kasau sent a photo taken at the Karura Forest. He was taking a walk, and why? For the love of nature and joining hands to protect our forests, is what he says. Now, if you want your photo showcased on Wild Pic, all you need to do is send in a photo of yourself doing something that shows you take an interest in the environment, wildlife and conservation. Just like our NTV Wild Facebook page and send in your photo via private message. But remember, you must include your full name, tell us where the photo was taken, what you were doing and why. So get out there and get clicking, and your photo could feature in our next show. And now here's what's coming up on the NTV Wild documentary series on Saturday night.
All frogs feed voraciously in the rains to lay on fat. And before the earth hardens in the sun, they make their preparations for the dry season. But the fish must stay. They jump desperately. Because of the heat, within hours, all of them will be dead in the mud. Many waterholes are no more than mud puddles now. Forced to drink side by side, the heavyweights come to an uneasy truce. The grass is the color of mud now. Still nutritious, but highly combustible. But until the rains come, every new day belongs only to the vultures, seasoned in the sun.
Our very existence and that of everything around us really does depend on a healthy environment. It is up to you and me to protect this planet and create a brighter, greener future. That's where we leave it on NTV Wild Talk with me, Smriti Vidyarthi. Thanks very much for watching. See you again Tuesday, 10 p.m.